We're going to begin today's Landscape Architects Technical Committee, May 29th, 2019, at the Campbell City Hall Council Chambers. Call to order, roll call. Andy.
Mark Trescott.
Present.
Susan Landry.
Here.
Patricia Trouth.
Here.
John Roshinsky.
Present.
Andrew Bowden, present. All present and accounted for.
Excellent. Chair's procedural remarks. We don't have public, but I am going to state for the webcam audience that we advise that the public signs in on the next to the door. It's optional to sign in for our meetings, and if you do sign in, you'll be entered into the official minutes of the meeting. Lunch will happen around noon when we'll have the lunch delivered, and we are going to take a break because we are on camera, so we'll be taking a break. We will not be working through lunch today, taking a brief break. I want to thank Susan Landry for hosting this meeting here in Campbell. It's a great facility. It's close to all the transit. Thank you so much for setting up this meeting.
Welcome, and I just want to say it's an honor to have us here. We have a cute little downtown if you guys haven't been there, and if you go out this back door, there's a 1850s house, the original farm person, they moved it for eBay, and it's now a museum. It's right here outside the door, so if you want to peek at it when you leave. But I'm very honored to have you here.
Great. Thank you very much, and it's great to be in the South Bay. I'd like to also announce that that Andy's last day technically is June 1st, although you'll be in a grace period.
That is correct. I don't know if the governor has appointed somebody in my stead yet, but until that time happens, I will continue to serve on the committee.
My term ends a year from now, 2020, and I will not be seeking to renew, so I'll go into grace period. So I encourage all licensed landscape architects who are watching or listening to consider applying for at least my spot. It's quite rewarding, and it's good work here that we're doing. Trish, DCA.
Did you want to work on that?
Yeah, I did. I had that later in my. But anyways.
Oh, okay.
I want to welcome John Roshinsky, our new member. And John, if you'd just take a second and tell us about yourselves.
All right, thank you. My name's John Roshinsky. I am a licensed landscape architect, and I've been involved off and on with LATSI for a number of years, primarily various committee assignments. I'm currently working as a facilities planner with San Diego Unified School District, and I want to thank the Senate Rules Committee who appointed me, and that's about it.
Thank you, John, and welcome. We look forward to working with you. Okay, Trish, update on Department of Consumer Affairs.
At our last meeting, the director was able to attend and also provide a DCA update. Unfortunately, there was no one available from DCA to attend, so they did provide us a written update. So I will do my best in reading this to you. It is a letter directed to Laura from Christopher Castrillo, Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Services. And he starts by advising that Director Dean Griffio left his post as DCA Director on April 12th. He thanks him for his leadership he provided to DCA, and also indicates that the Governor's Office is currently working toward identifying a successor as the executive team looks forward to working with the Governor's Office to ensure a smooth transition as we prepare for the new leadership at the department. He continues that the department is still planning to host the director's quarterly meeting with all executive officers and bureau chiefs on June 3rd from 1:30 to 3 p.m. at DCA headquarters. The next update is regarding the executive officer salary study. The department retained KH Consulting to conduct the executive officer's salary study. The study aims to provide an in-depth analysis of programmatic and operational complexities of DCA boards, as well as a salary comparison survey from other states. The project was expected to take approximately 6 months, with an initial estimated completion date of March 2019. There has been a slight delay due to some challenges receiving timely responses from other states as part of our benchmark survey. In the interest of incorporating as much data as possible about salaries from similar positions in other states, the timeline has been extended. They are aiming to release the final report to our programs in the next couple of weeks, and they appreciate the patience as they work toward finalizing the important project. The next update is regarding DCA's open data portal. In January, DCA Office of Information Services announced the launch of the DCA's Open Data Portal, a publicly accessible one-stop shop for licensing statistics and information where users can see trends and changes in licensing data going back 3 years, filtered by individual board or bureau, even by individual license type. In April, the OIS Data Governance Team announced the incorporation of enforcement and application data into the Open Data Portal. In the Enforcement Statistics section, users can access information on the number of complaints received and referred for investigation. Also available is data on case aging, including cases that end with or without disciplinary action. In the Application Statistics section, users can access information on the average application processing time of initial exam and license applications, as well as processing times for incomplete applications. And they give a contact for any questions. Future Leadership Development Program. On May 22nd, this year's cohort of 8 individuals graduated from the department's Future Leadership Development Program. Over the past 8 months, participants have been developed by their mentors, exposed to pertinent qualities and characteristics of executive leadership, completed and presented a team project that directly impacts DC as a whole, and networked with internal and external leaders. They thank you for your valued partnership. Please let us know if the department can be of service to you or your board. If you have any questions, feel free to contact Christopher Castrillo.
Thank you, Trish. Are there any questions by the members? No. Moving on. Item D, public comment on items not on the agenda. The committee may not discuss or take action on any item raised during this comment section, except to decide whether to refer the item to the committee's next strategic planning session and/or place the matter on the agenda for a future meeting. So now I'd like to ask our public if there are any public comments on items that are not on our current agenda. Nope.
No.
Okay, we're going to move on.
May I just add?
Yeah.
May I just add that we did receive 11 public comments for item D regarding the UC Extension Program, which we will present when we get to that agenda item.
Item D.
Did I say D? K?
D is the open forum.
K,
Item K.
UC Extension.
You said D, so I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Oh, I was looking at D, right?
Okay.
Okay. So we've received public comment for item K. Exactly, and we can discuss that then.
Correct.
Perfect. Okay, review and possible action on February 8th, 2019 LATC meeting minutes, item E. Have the members had a chance to review? Okay.
Yes. I move that we approve the minutes.
I'll
Okay.
second.
Okay, the minutes have been approved and seconded. Any public comment? Member comment? Roll call vote, please.
Mark Truscott,
Yes.
Andrew Bowden, aye. Susan Landry,
Aye.
Patricia Trouth,
Aye.
John Roshinsky.
Abstain.
Okay, the minutes are approved as presented. Item F, Program Chair's Report. Trish?
Okay. Included in the packet is the Executive Officer's Report. Brief update on business modernization. We continue our efforts toward our business process mapping. Staff have completed the as-is process maps and continue to have weekly workshops for the could-be business process mapping. And we are on schedule as originally outlined in our project charter. In the interim, we have implemented or rolled out the online credit card renewals on April 23rd. To date, we've had 58 licensees who have renewed online. So there were a couple of glitches which appear to have worked out. So I think it is a very successful platform that's available for licensees right now. So we'll continue to monitor that and update the committee. I wanted to note the board under executive committee, they did in January discuss a new board logo, and you'll see on the very front of the executive officer's report their new logo, which was approved by the board. So I'm considering bringing that to the committee to discuss at our August meeting.
Can I just get clarification? That's the, it's off to the left, the logo you're talking about?
Yes, that's their new logo.
Okay. Thank you.
I wanted to also welcome Deborah Dulay. She's sitting down at the table below. She is our new special projects analyst who began her assignment on April 2nd. Okay, let's see. At our last meeting, we approved the CSC contract development with OPEZ. That was fully executed by the Budget Office on March 8th. And then the next layer administration will be held on between August 5th and August 17th. The application deadline is June 21st. Wanted to thank Susan for her recent outreach at UC Berkeley on April 18th. Approximately 35 students are enrolled in the class. I think we had about 24 attend the outreach presentation. We got 11 surveys back with positive feedback from the outreach, so thank you, Susan. And then update on our regulatory proposal for Section 2615, form of examination, and 2620, education and training credits. Those should be with DCA Legal this week. They've completed our internal preparation for that. And then, sorry, I didn't make sure I didn't lose my place here. The next item is 2620.5. I'm just going to hold off until we get to that section later on in the meeting. Let me discuss that. And then we updated regulations, sections 2655, substantial relationship criteria, and 2656, criteria for rehabilitation as a result of AB 2138. Those were approved by the board on February 27th, and they are now with DCA Legal as of March 12th. Associated with that, we are also updating our disciplinary guidelines, and staff have commenced preparing the justifications for all of the changes that are required in the guidelines. So we hope to have that submitted to DCA in the near future. So that concludes my update.
Thank you, Trish. Any questions by the members? Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is a new item for us. Review and discuss 2019 legislation. Laura would like to discuss that with us, please.
Sure. Okay, so we'll just go through the bills that are on the list. Let me know if you have any questions as we go through them. The first one is Assembly Bill 312 by Assemblymember Cooley about regulations. It would require agencies to identify duplicative or overlapping regulations and report to the legislature and the governor, and then repeal outdated regulations. So this bill actually was held in the Assembly Appropriations Committee, so it'll become a 2-year bill. So it's quite a substantial cost when you look at the impact to all the state agencies impacted. So it's not going to be moving this year. So the next item is AB 476 by Assemblymember Rubio. It requires the Department of Consumer Affairs to establish a task force on foreign trained professionals. And then the department will need to report to the legislature. So this bill is still moving through the process. It is currently in the Senate, awaiting referral to Policy Committee. Any questions?
Yes, I do have one question on that. Is this looking primarily at foreign trained individuals or foreign born?
It's foreign trained.
Okay. So it could be an American citizen who went overseas and did their education and training
Yes.
overseas. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. The next item is Assembly Bill 544 by Assemblymember Bro. This is about inactive license fees and accrued and unpaid renewal fees, and it limits the amount that you could that boards could recover from delinquent licensees seeking to renew their license. And this bill also was held in the Assembly Appropriations Committee, so it's a 2-year bill. The next item is Assembly Bill 613 by Assemblymember Lowe. This allows boards under the Department of Consumer Affairs to increase their fees every 4 years according to the corresponding increase in the Consumer Price Index. And then that fee increase would be outside of the regulatory process. So the author is trying to provide a way for boards to kind of provide for a modest fee increase to keep up with cost, but avoiding going through the regulatory process or seeking legislation. So the board is in support of the bill. It's been referred to, it's passed the Assembly, it's in the Senate.
I would just like to make a comment that Assembly Lowe is our assemblyman, and he used to be for 8 years on the Campbell City Council, and he was mayor right before he got into the legislature.
Yeah. And he's the chair of the Assembly Business and Professions Committee that has oversight over LATC and the board. So it's
Yeah, so he's a local here.
The next bill is Assembly Bill 1076 by Assemblymember Ting. This bill requires the Department of Justice, I guess I should say, right now, people who have convictions have a process for seeking to get those convictions expunged, and the burden is on the individual to go through the process. This sort of places a requirement on the Department of Justice to sort of more automatically go through a process of expunging convictions rather than relying on the individual to do it. So this could impact the type of convictions that we would be able to consider when reviewing applications. And that bill is also passed, it's on the Assembly floor this week, so it needs to move out of the Assembly this week. The next item is Senate Bill 53 by Senator Wilk. This is about open meetings, and it requires any kind of advisory committee, when there's at least 2 members present, to follow the Open Meeting Act requirements. So currently, I know at least some boards use maybe 2-member advisory committees to work on an issue and report back to a full committee or to the board. And so it would say that those meetings need to be subject to the Open Meetings Act, even if it's only advisory.
Excuse me, so that would mean that it has to be advertised?
Right, publicly noticed meetings.
So if 2 people were going to get together as a subcommittee, it has to give a 2-week
10 days notice.
10 days.
Yeah. Yes.
I would assume that means that when those 2 people meet, that they have to meet in a public location where people can get to.
Right, and it has to be public and accessible. So,
And
I
that
mean, it could
would
still be a
probably-
teleconference meeting. Well, we'd have to follow the notice requirements and provide access to the public.
Okay, thank you.
Prior legislation was vetoed by Governor Brown, but we'll see, what happens this year.
So just as clarification, so let's say two of us, two LATC members, happen to go out to lunch, and where it's possible that LATC business may be discussed, but not necessarily, that would not necessarily be the intent of the lunch. But let's just say it becomes a topic. What happens then? Is that a breach of the regulation?
I don't think that's directly covered by the bill, but I think, Tara, that's covered sort of by, is there any
Because that
type
seems
of
to be.
exemption to the Open Meeting Act for those type of discussions? Like when members dine together?
Well, I think it potentially opens the door for that argument that that might be a public meeting. However, the point is that I think it's aimed at committees that are formed formally by the committee or the board. So if you were just out having lunch, that's not necessarily a formal subcommittee or task force, but you would want to be careful about whether or not you were discussing substantive issues that are before the LATC.
They're using the word committee. Would that also be a subcommittee? Did the definition include the description as a subcommittee?
Yeah, I would read that to include subcommittee.
It's listed there in the second paragraph.
And I also am looking for some clarification in the Legislative Council digest here. It says committee, advisory, subcommittee, or whatever that consists of 3 or more individuals.
Needs to meet the requirements, yeah. I think right now, boards are able to appoint 2-member committees and not be subject to the Open Meeting Act requirements, but I believe the intent of this bill is to require when there's more than 1 member present to be subject to. But I'll have to take another look at the language, and I can send you an update.
Well, 3 is existing law.
Right.
So C, if you'll look at the very end of that, it says except as provided under subdivision D, and that's what starts to aim at the 2-member meetings of a commission, committee, subcommittee, advisory.
I think that D there, starting on line 18, is the new language added by the bill. So in which any member of an advisory body is part of the state body and is supported by any funds provided by that body, that's going to be subject to the Open Meeting Act requirements. So not specifically identifying a minimum number of members, but just the 1 member. And that bill did pass out of the Senate. It's now in the Assembly at the Governmental Organization Committee. Any other questions on that one? Okay. So the next one is Senate Bill 601 by Senator Morell. It authorizes any state agency that issues a license to reduce or waive the fees for licensure, renewal, or replacement of a license for someone who's displaced by a declared federal emergency or proclaimed state emergency. So someone in a disaster area that loses their license, we could waive the replacement license fee or renewal fee. So, and that bill also passed the Senate. It's in the Assembly now, awaiting assignment. Okay. And the last bill is Senate Bill 608 by Senator Glazer. It's the board and LATC's sunset bill. So it extends the sunset date for the board and the LATC, and it also makes the related changes that were requested by both programs, including the changes to the written contract requirement. It's also going to require the board and LATC to fingerprint applicants for licensure. So those are the main changes for LATC. Makes a few additional changes for the board.
No.
I think I brought this up when I first came on board. There was a discussion about fingerprinting, and I had supported this because a person can go into someone's home and there could be kids. So I think this is a good bill, and I do support the fingerprinting.
Point of clarification on that, it's fingerprinting for applicants, not for existing licensees, correct?
It is at this point, so I think we're still working with legislative staff on exactly how implementation will work and if it would apply to all licensees. Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? I think that was last bill, correct? Okay. Any comments or questions from the members? Okay, well, we're going to move on then.
Oh, sorry. Item H, Samuelo?
Sorry. Yes. Item H, discuss and possible action on the California Department of Water Resources Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, MWELO. Okay, Trish?
So, Marky had asked that we continue to,
Sorry.
Marky had asked that we have the model water efficiency landscape ordinance as somewhat of a standing item on our agenda. And so we've been monitoring the activity and just wanted to update the committee and advise that DWR does not anticipate updating the ordinance until 2023. And so we re-included the ordinance along with their findings at the end of this section. It's really just an update. We don't have any new information to report on the ordinance.
Okay, great. Comments?
Yes, I would point you to page 38.14G within the document, and it talks, let's see what, I just saw it here, what, it talks about the composting, and now I can't find where it is again. I would like us to be tracking the SB 1384. There is, I forget what it's called now. There is a mandatory statewide program that cities have to enforce, and any other large campus, they have to collect all their food waste, yard waste, and the biggest part is they have to recycle that, but buy back 70% of what the city generates. Cities also required to penalize residents. Are going to start like basically scanning trash cans. And then also the resident, so the city would be fined, or the campus plus the resident would be fined. And the issue for us specifically here is we don't have any place to put 70% of our compost. The second one is within here, it discusses that you have to have, they recommend that you use composting, but there's no coordination between this and then saying the composting should be part of this buyback. I know that's not substantial enough because there's no other major changes. But if we are going to be tracking this, I'd like to see the coordination and how that might affect what next round of MWELO review.
Okay. Other comments?
If I could just add, I am getting updates to the implementation and the regulatory process, so maybe in the future update in the packet or in an update to send to the members, we can just include that as an item.
And that program is like 1.5 years behind in implementation, so who knows how long it may take.
John, did you have a question?
If I may
Go ahead.
just ask a quick question. I just wanted to clarify to make sure that MWELO is being tested for on the CSE. Can we?
MWELO specifically is not. What is tested on is water management, and it's 12% of the exam. So, yes, it is.
Can I
Innovation
add,
in
Trish?
water.
So the MWELO, the 2015 MWELO is tested on the exam. It's not listed on the candidate guide specifically, but it is. There are questions related to it on the exam.
Will that be updated on that list so that people do know that it will be part of it?
I believe the exam development staff determined that it didn't need to be specified in the candidate guide and that our exam content outline that's included on the guide is sufficient. So.
Andy, I have a copy of the candidate guide with the exam outline if you want to take a look at that later. Okay.
Okay, I'd like to announce that Tian Feng, board member, is with us right now. Thank you, Tian.
Sorry, I'm being late, and as a board member liaison to this committee. I actually have a question regarding this. More experienced board member or staff can help. What is the jurisdiction this ordinance apply to? Is any agencies or any entity receive a state funding, or how do we qualify that?
I understand it's a state ordinance.
It applies to all new landscapes, and they actually have square footage in there. So if it's over a certain size, then it's required.
Yeah, that is the scope in terms of the nature of its jurisdiction of this ordinance. For example, our agency is an independent entity. We have our standards, and we all frequently adopt the state standards. So just a question like this, is anything, everywhere, any type of organization?
Each municipality can alter this language in here to suit their needs, but they all, if they don't prepare anything, it's my understanding that it falls back to the state requirements.
And so as the private sector as well, your homeowner, you comply with that?
Again, it's based on the square footage.
I don't believe that private homeowner associations are, but the agency that supplies the water to them is. Typically, it's water supply, the agencies that supply the water, and they're charged with adopting the model ordinance that we have before us, or one that they craft based on the model ordinance. So it can be in a water agency, it can be a city, it can be a county. It's whoever governs the water and delivers the water. And that's my understanding.
Okay. It is a requirement of cities to enforce this, and private residences are under this regulation. Two things, if the city, you know how they have this whole thing of what counts as a renovation versus what's new, and that used to be the one wall thing that no longer takes, like in Santa Clara County, that's not applied anymore. They have a very descriptive of how much counts. So if the city or regulating agency determines it is a new project, they have to comply, and the city then has to require it in any permit package that the developer, anybody, basically homeowner business over that minimum square feet does have to submit the calculations and the plans. So an individual residence would be required. So the water company may say then, but that the city is the one that's reviewing the plans and the permits.
It's been my experience, my professional experience, that it's been a little inconsistent in terms of agencies and how they how they monitor, how rigorous they are with reviewing and monitoring these guidelines. And it's my hope that in the years to come that it'll tighten up. And I'd love to see our staff continue to monitor this activity and just report back to us when it's appropriate.
Susan, since you mentioned, so has the city of Campbell adopted this ordinance?
Not only that, but all the cities in Santa Clara County, they do require this. The Santa Clara Valley Water District is our purveyor, and then we have like Gray Oaks Water, San Jose Water, so it's the district that then also has adopted the MWELO regulations. And for instance, actually I just got a drawing for a home here that it was required, but it's very inconsistent. Sometimes the guy comes in and says, well, I can't really afford to do that, or can you let me slide? And so that kind of stuff does happen.
Are there any other questions or comments? Tien, are you good?
Thank you. Yeah.
Patricia? John?
Yeah,
None.
I was reviewing it again the last week, and I know it must say in here somewhere who's permitted to prepare these calculations, but I did not see it in what was in our handout.
A individual homeowner, I think, is allowed to do it over a certain size, but it usually says in here there's an irrigation designer, landscape architect.
I didn't see it in here.
I don't know where it actually is, but I do know somewhere there was a who can actually prepare them.
I think it is my understanding that the M. Wheeler documents, the intention is to refer to our Practice Act, and that they really don't add detail in M. Wheeler. That the understanding is that our Practice Act will define who can and cannot prepare and sign documents. That's my understanding. Trish? Yes. Tara? Okay. So that's just a little background, and that it's potentially their intention in future updates to continue that methodology where they would leave who can prepare to our Practice Act and not define that, so that there's potential for conflict.
Okay. Wouldn't you think that it would be referenced somewhere in here then? Because I don't see it.
I just found it.
Where?
It's on page 38.1 of our packet, and it's up at the right-hand column. Item KK, landscape document package, must be documents required under 492.3. And so I haven't checked back to that one, but it does state in there. So 492. 492.1 is on 38.3 of the packet, and it does say there compliance with landscape document package.
Yeah, if I can add, I know that when the MWELO was last revised, there was a section that specifically addressed who's qualified to prepare the documentation. I think another really important issue that remains, and Mark kind of mentioned this, that who's actually qualified to review these documents, and that will continue to be an issue of training the agency staff members who will actually be reviewing and approving this. And I know another issue is that that the intention of this regulation was not to weaken current licensing law, and that was a point that was really pressed at the time.
Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to move on then. Item I, discuss and possible action on the 2019-2021 strategic plan objective to research the feasibility of requiring a license number on all correspondence and advertisement platforms to inform and protect consumers. Trish.
So correct. The current strategic plan identifies the objective as you just outlined. It requires a landscape architect only include their name and words, landscape architect, in all forms of advertising or public presentments. So in an effort to better inform and protect California consumers, the proposed changes of the LATC's current advertising requirements will expand to include license numbers in all forms of advertising. So what's presented before you is the proposed changes to Section 2671, Public Presentments and Advertising, where requirements where the license number is added, and we're asking for the LATC to recommend board approval.
Discussion, members. Who lit up first? John, go ahead.
I guess all I can say is when I saw this, I thought this was already a requirement.
It had been a requirement at one point in time, and then for some reason that requirement went away, and I'm not exactly too sure when that happened. So I'm in support of this this move. I think adding the license number will help to eliminate a lot of confusion in people's minds as to who is a licensee and who is not.
Patricia?
I'm assuming the architects already add their license number, or no? No? Okay.
I believe the contractors are required to. And I deal with that almost on a daily basis. So it's very helpful when the license number is there and it can be checked and verified. Because it is kind of surprising how many times a license number is put on a set of plans and you go to verify it and find out it's invalid, it's inactive, other situations have gone on with it. If the license number's not there, it makes it that much more difficult to check. So I think, again, by requiring that landscape architects have their license number on it, it just gives the public that one additional step that they can use to be able to identify who is and who is not licensed.
Andy, you mentioned the plans and the specification. This is different. This is regarding to your marketing material and your correspondence.
This would refer to everything. So this would be plans, specifications, all correspondence going out. Everything would require a license number on it.
Chair. Yes, the presentation made to the public is where that falls under. So any business cards, anything that you're presenting yourself. One thing I'd like to ask is, does like a Angie's List, is that going to then be required to then make sure that Angie's List or whoever the body of is allowing someone to advertise, would they then be required or to enforce this? This came up with Airbnb in San Francisco, that they now are like the website or whoever lists the business has to have the registration number like for Airbnb. So would that apply to something like this?
So the burden for enforcement for LATC, it's always going to be on the licensee. So if there's an advertisement on Angie's List or another entity, we can ask Angie's List to require the license number, but there's not a whole lot we can do to Angie's List if they don't comply. But if we see a licensee that is advertising on that source, we can cite the licensee for the violation. So, and the board does require the license number on the contract.
Additional thoughts? Tara?
I've just got a quick note. When I'm looking at the language on page 2 of this item, in the language on page 2 of this item, everything that's being added is underlined in blue text, and we've got a couple commas in subdivision A and subdivision B that are underlined, so they're being added, and those should also be in blue text. I just wanted to make sure that those changes are made and everyone understands that those commas are being added.
Additional thoughts? What would you guys like
So-
to do? Go ahead, Dan.
Just information for landscape architect. So there will be inconsistent, if we would call, within the same board that architects does not need to put their license number in their correspondence, in their marketing material, on their business card, but you will then require landscape architect to do the requirement as specified here. So there's some kind of inconsistency, but I don't think there's any harm to public. That's my view. Yeah.
Trish?
So while the board does not have a provision in their act to specifically regarding advertising requirements, Section 140 requires the licensee, the architect, to inform clients that they are licensed by displaying their license or a document stating they are licensed in a public area, or provide a statement that they are licensed in a letterhead.
So it's a common we post our license on the wall in our office.
Any other comments? What would the group like to do with this?
I'll just make one quick comment. Does the public, aren't you supposed to ask the public if they have comments before we make a motion? Because otherwise I was going to make a motion.
Actually, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that we have the motion and then we ask for public comment on the motion.
Sorry. So I'm going to make a motion that I guess it's that we approve this addition to Title 16, Division 26, Section 2671, regarding public presentation and advertising requirements.
Second.
Okay. The item has been moved and seconded. Any additional comments or thoughts by the group before I turn it open to the public? Public comment on this issue, and I may say that if the public has any comments, you're going to have to come up to the microphone and speak. No public comments on this? Okay, public comment closed on this issue. Any additional comments by the group? Roll call.
Mark Truscott.
Yes.
Andrew Bowden. Aye. Susan Landry.
Aye.
Patricia Trouth. John Roshinsky.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, move on to the next item. Review and possible action on assessment of initial landscape architect license fee. Trish?
Okay, this stems from a discussion at our meeting on February 8th, where a member of the public asked if the LATC might consider looking at the initial license fee. I think the intent was to make it easier for candidates or newly licensed individuals to enter to become licensed. So what we did, Deborah, our special projects analyst, she was tasked to collect the initial license fees for all of the jurisdictions, all of the LA jurisdictions. And what we found initially was that there's just a huge disparity between all the fees. So we narrowed it down to our region, Clark Region 5 jurisdictions, as listed on the attachment, and the larger jurisdictions, California, Florida, New York, and Texas. So what's presented before you is the list of initial license fees, and then to make it equivalent, since some had initial license fees that were for 2 years, 3 years, or 1 year, we did an annual equivalent. And what you see is presented before you, including the number of licensees within each jurisdiction. So what the committee is asked to do is, discuss the initial license fee, and should you decide to move forward or like to research further, I would recommend possibly including budget staff for that discussion, but you're welcome to decide.
Okay, first and foremost, thank you for the research. It was really well done, 1 page, real concise. Thank you. Nice bit. Comments by the group?
I'd like a clarification. So for California, we're saying the initial license fee is $400. Is that reduced just like, when renewals? No. So what's our justification for the amount? Is there a lot of paperwork associated with?
What I can use the renewal as an example.
Okay.
We were approaching our statutory limit, BPC 128.5, and so we work with budget in identifying how to bring it down. So there were two avenues we pursued. One was a negative BCP, and then we had a temporary license renewal fee reduction. After the end of 2 years, we reassessed that renewal fee, and we extended it for another 2 years, which is up at the end of this fiscal year. So it involves some analysis from our budget office to determine whether it's feasible or not.
Okay, other questions, comments?
So these fees would be just for the initial licensing, and then once they come up for renewal, then whatever the renewal fee is, that's what they would pay at that point?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
And as a point of clarification, this is for 2 years? This initial fee is for 2 years of
Yes,
license?
correct.
Okay.
Would this be partly to help reduce that potential excess funds that are in there? Or I guess the question I'm trying to ask is, what would the fiscal impact be?
I think we're not really at that point
you
right
have
now. We are just looking, at the information to see where we lie in comparison to other jurisdictions, just to see if we're within, I think, a reasonable range in comparison to other states. And then if not, discuss if we'd still like to continue to pursue it, then we would get deeper into our discussions with the budget office.
Okay. And one other question that I had is in regards to reciprocity. If someone who's been licensed in another state comes to California and applies for reciprocity, does this fee reduction or whatever apply to that as well?
It would not. It's a separate license fee.
Thank you.
Okay, so as I understand it, we can choose just to leave it the way it is and just move on and not have it on the next agenda.
Mm-hmm.
We can choose to have it on the next agenda, maybe have someone from budget come so they can speak more about how it, if we change this, how it would alter our budget, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And, or we can do something right now, since it is on our agenda, although
Yeah.
it's not recommended by
Right.
staff, correct?
Right.
Okay.
We don't have enough information.
I guess I'd have a question in my mind as to, is there an actual need to make any adjustments? I mean, I know this got brought up in the last meeting, and I can't really recall why it became an important issue, in somebody's mind anyway, that this be agendized. But for how long have we had this initial license fee at $400? It's been a while, right? So, I mean, it seems like it's been doing fine. When you look at all the other Region 5, states, we're not the highest, we're not the lowest. But when you add up the number of licensees of all the other states combined, they barely even get to what we have in our state. So I'm not sure, it's kind of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I mean, is there actually a need to do anything with this?
I just recall the discussion that, it's pretty expensive to get licensed, and a lot of graduates, have a lot of debt. Now, I understand I probably shouldn't enter into this, but what I find kind of interesting is, for example, it used to be you could get licensed in a state and you didn't have to belong to CLARB. Now you're pretty much kind of tied into that. So, we are incrementally adding a lot of cost to getting licensed at a time where I feel like these new licensees are not in the best position to be able to afford it.
So would the group prefer to have this on our next agenda and have the budget people here so we can explore it a little more, or just leave it the way I'm seeing nods, yeah. If I see one nod, yeah, then I'm thinking, yeah, let's bring it back.
Do you mind if I suggest, Trish and I were speaking about this earlier, about having our budget representative attend the November meeting that's going to be in Sacramento. Also, the department has been transitioning to a new fiscal system, and so it's not fully implemented yet. We don't have accurate budget reports, so I'm hoping later in the fiscal year, or I guess into the next fiscal year, we'd have that. So if it could be postponed to that meeting with a budget update, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, is everybody okay with that? I certainly am.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fine.
no, I'm okay with it. I guess a question I would have, commenting to what Patricia was saying, is do we have any evidential, data that would say people are not becoming licensed because of the $400 being too expensive? And if that were the case, okay, then what would be the right number? I mean, is it $300? Is it $350? I mean, where is that glass ceiling where somebody says, "Oh, I'm not paying that. That's just too expensive." After they've already gone through taking the LAIR exam and the CSE and paying those fees, which granted are expensive, But then by the time you get that, and it's like, all right, now $400 and you get your license number. No, sorry, not going to do it. $400 that's the deal breaker right there.
Trish?
In my mind, I would want to find out, okay, well, what is that?
Well, my first question was, what is the justification for charging a renewal fee of $220 and charging this initial fee at $400? So, I mean, if there's truly, a lot of administrative issues that have to be addressed, and it actually takes, the staff time to get them into the system, then I'm totally for it. I guess I'd just like to know, a little bit more of what's involved.
So you're looking for a breakdown? Is that what you're saying? So
I'm just
takes 15 minutes to enter into the database. Because included in that, I'm assuming, is the wall certificate, right? That's all inclusive in that $400, and your pocket certificate. So there's costs generated with creating those documents, even though I know it's just typing in the name. But
yeah, no, that's very true. I totally forgot about the certificate.
Okay, Trish is going to respond, and then I also would like you to respond from a staff standpoint. Is doing an analysis like that something that you feel comfortable having back at the next meeting, or would you prefer just to talk about it all in November when we have the budget staff with us also?
Most definitely when the budget staff is present.
Okay.
I think that would be a better discussion. I just wanted to just reiterate, I guess, at this meeting, it's really just to decide whether it's something you're interested in doing, and then the feasibility of it really is that next step. So I think we're kind of getting into already discussing, different costs involved, and I'm not really sure that's for this discussion. I feel like are you interested in making it, lowering the fees so that new licensees, or we can potentially increase, our licensed population.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I saw a lot of nods of heads, so let's plan on adding it to the calendar for November, this item, with the budget office here and any analysis the staff is comfortable preparing prior to that. Laura?
I was just going to add to Patricia's point, I don't know specifically about the assessment that was done when these fees were set, but generally for a regulatory program, the initial license fee pays for the cost to support the administration of the program, and the renewal fee funds the enforcement efforts of the program. And so just for the committee also to consider, if you look at a reduction in this fee, LATC's costs are fairly fixed, and so you would have to see how you make up the difference if you reduce it in one area.
Okay. Just to confirm, I'm sorry, Tien?
Again, questions. So how long that $400 has been there? How many years? Do we recall?
I would have to look it up. I don't know how long it's been 400.
Can we assume quite a few years?
Yes.
Yeah. So Laura, how about our architects in license initial fees? How high is that? I'm sorry, if you don't recall, don't worry.
I believe it is $400 as well, but I'm not 100% certain on that. I can check.
So, yeah, just for consideration, if the fee is there for a very long time and the cost of living increase actually is going up. So actually every year we're reducing that fee. So is that necessary? Keep visiting that issues. Any work we assign staff to do, there were also effort involved and cost involved.
Okay, so let's calendar it for November. Next meeting, if we don't want to take it off the calendar, we can discuss that too. But let's plan on hearing it in November. Next item K, review and possible action on the University of California Extension Certificate Program Subcommittee's recommendation to amend CCR Title 16, Division 26, Section 2620.5, requirements for an approved extension certificate program. Trish.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, because I am the chair of the UCLA Guidance Committee, I have to recuse myself from this discussion. So I am going to step out of the room.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden.
Okay. Okay, at our February meeting, well, let me back up a little. A subcommittee was appointed by the committee to review the requirements for the approval of the UC Extension program. The subcommittee met, and their recommendations were presented at our meeting in February. At that time, the committee requested that, and I'm sorry, these recommendations are on attachment K1. And at that meeting, the members requested to actually see what it would look like in the proposed language. So that is what we included in our materials, along with the comments from legal counsel. Since then, we did receive 11 public comments in support of the proposed changes, as well as the comments from legal counsel. In addition, subsequent to when this materials went out, we received additional comments or revisions from DCA legal counsel. So that was handed out today. So I'm going to ask Tara to walk us through some of those proposed changes.
Okay, so I'm looking at the proposed regulatory language. This is section 2620.5. You'll see revisions to subdivision A. That's primarily just clarifying language. You'll see a revision in 1, which is to correct a citation to an otherwise repealed education code section. So it's corrected there to the correct education code. We've got minor technical changes in subdivision A, paragraph 2. And you'll see in the updated proposed language, a strike through for the last sentence of A2, which is to remove the program's literature shall fully and accurately describe the program's philosophy and objectives. There doesn't seem to be much reason to include this sentence here, so I'm recommending that it be stricken from the regulation. I'm not really sure if you want to go piece by piece and do comments on each section, or I can discuss the whole thing and we can return to various sections as the members have questions. Is there a preference?
I just have a really quick initial question. The definition of literature in this particular case, what were they referring to when they were speaking to that?
I have no idea. You know, and that's part of it. Is it literature to entice new students? Is it literature handed out on the first day of school? I don't know. So it is ambiguous.
I'm sorry, I sat on the subcommittee, and it was all of the above. It was any and all literature related to the program.
Okay, moving on. You'll see other minor and technical revisions on the first page. So on page 2, the next substantive revision is in subparagraph I. This was requested by the task force to add current California statutes and regulations covering the environment, landscape architecture, and water conservation as part of the program curriculum. Presumably that would be preparing the students as licensed candidates and taking any California-specific examinations. Okay, so new paragraph 10. This is actually an existing provision that's just kind of hanging out there by itself. I'm proposing that we add 10 in front of it so it's clear that it's a separate term. Right now, the provision states the program's curriculum shall not be revised until it has been approved by the board. This whole regulation is about an education program submitting an application to the board for board approval to continue to provide education in furtherance of an extended certification. Yeah, an extension certificate. So if we're talking about in terms of an application, right here we're saying the program's curriculum cannot be revised until it has been approved by the board. What happens if the board disapproves the application? Can they change the curriculum to meet the requirements of the board? Right now, no, they wouldn't be able to. So I'm suggesting that we add or must be revised to correct deficiencies identified by the board. That way, it would not allow the program's curriculum to be changed willy-nilly. The board would have to be advised as to what's happening with the curriculum, but it does provide sufficient authority to the program to change the curriculum to address deficiencies that the board has identified. Moving on, we've got more minor changes to the language to incorporate different paragraph numbering. Then the next substantive change is subdivision B. This lays out what would be required for the program to submit their application. This is part of the process that we're trying to provide these programs. This was also requested as part of the task force that we discussed back in February. So the provision is to apply for board approval 6 months prior to the date of anticipated site visit date required in subdivision C. The program shall apply for board approval by submitting a self-evaluation report that shall detail the program's compliance with this section. So this starts laying out what the time frame is and what's required of the program to submit their application. They would have to submit a self-evaluation report as listed in subdivision A. They would need to apply 6 months before their anticipated site visit date. This provides sufficient time for the committee staff and the board to take a look at the application and make sure all of the written documentation is sufficient, and then to prepare for the site visit itself. Okay, subdivision C provides the procedure for the site visit itself. What was included in the task force's list of recommendations was a one-day site visit team comprised of one member of the LATC, one faculty member from a California school accredited by the Landscape Architectural Accreditation Board, or LAB, and one licensed landscape architect. And those 3 individuals would perform an inspection or review of the education program prior to granting board approval or renewal of approval. I've got several concerns with this provision. First, why does this need to be a one-day site visit? Potentially, we don't have any real reason to require an entire day for a site review. Also, we're specifically listing out specific members of this site visit team, which may be difficult to actually comply with. Other boards in the regulations, when they're providing board approval for these types of programs, typically just leave it at a board designee. That way the board can select an individual who can go out and perform the site review, but it doesn't have to be one of specific individuals that you may or may not be able to contract for this purpose. So I've got an alternative here. It's alternative C. This would remove the one-day site visit requirement. It would authorize a board designee who shall not be personally affiliated with the educational program so as to avoid a conflict of interest, to complete an inspection or review of the educational program prior to granting board approval or renewal of approval. It would also include the board designee may include one member of the LATC and one faculty member from a California school accredited by LAB. If both a committee member and a LAB school faculty member perform the site inspection or review, the committee member shall not be personally affiliated with the LAB school that employs the faculty member. All of this is trying to avoid a conflict of interest where you've got a committee member who's in cahoots with the LAAB faculty member who are then inspecting the extension certificate program. I still have concerns about including a LAB accredited faculty member, because if you step back and take a look at this, you'll see that the extension certificate programs are in direct competition with the LAB accredited programs. So I don't see any justification for including the LAB accredited faculty member who may or may not have anything to do with the accreditation process of their program. It's just some person who works there. So I don't think we have sufficient justification to require or include a faculty member from a LAB accredited school. So, and I'm recommending alternative C, but I'm also recommending that we strike the ability of the board designee to include one faculty member from a California school accredited by the LAB. Okay, moving on.
When you keep on moving on, then we'll
Okay.
ask questions.
Subdivision D, this is another substantive addition, would require the board's designee to review the educational program self-evaluation report and site inspection and submit that submit to the committee a written report which shall contain findings as to whether the educational program's application, documentation, and site inspection comply with approval requirements and make a recommendation regarding approval. This is starting to set up more of the process. So once the board's designee goes and performs a site inspection or review of the program, they have to write it up and provide a recommendation to the committee. Subdivision E provides what the committee will do with that information. The committee shall review the application of the educational program for approval at a public meeting and may recommend approval, request additional information from the educational program, recommend provisional approval, and I'm also recommending the addition of recommend denial of the application. Otherwise, the committee would only be authorized to pause the application for submission of additional information or provide some kind of approval recommendation to the board. They couldn't actually deny it or recommend a denial. Subdivision F would provide what happens after the committee recommends. I think we need to strike of approval in that first line, upon recommendation by the committee of the educational program, because we're now going to hopefully provide for a denial recommendation. The board then has to review the committee's recommendation and educational program application at a public meeting. The board shall consider the application, written report, and recommendation regarding approval and may take one of the following actions. Underneath that are three possibilities: approval, provisional approval, and denial. You'll notice in paragraph 3, denial is subject to appeal. The next, subdivision G, program shall be notified in writing by the board of any actions taken regarding their application. I'm also recommending the addition of subdivision H, which needs to spell out what happens when the program appeals the board's decision. So what I have here is for your consideration. I was unable to locate any other boards that have any kind of appeal process for these educational programs. So this is kind of, it's new. Within 90 days of the date of written notification of the board's denial of an application, the educational program may submit its appeal of the board's decision to the committee that shall include, and this is the appeal documentation. It shall include a report of deficiencies that have been corrected. The committee shall review the report and may perform an inspection or review of the program. Notice there, if the deficiencies were not based on the site inspection, but rather the documentation, the committee could just designate someone to review the program. They don't have to do another site inspection. Then moving on, the report of corrected deficiencies shall be reviewed in accordance with subdivisions E and F, which go back to the committee public review of the application and recommendation to the board for a public meeting review and final approval, provisional approval, or denial. Moving on, subdivision I, the board approval period of any educational program shall be for a term of 6 years unless otherwise specified pursuant to subdivision F2, which is the provisional approval. Subdivision J, to renew board approval 6 months prior to the date of expiration of the board approval, the educational program shall apply for approval renewal by submitting a self-evaluation report that shall detail the educational program's compliance with this section. So going back to making sure that all of the materials, curriculum, and other teacher credentialing requirements, all of that is met. I'm also recommending the addition to this renewal to make sure that it does go through the appropriate review process. So if what I added was the self-evaluation report and educational program shall be reviewed in accordance with subdivision C through F, which just makes sure that in this renewal process, it's not just a self-evaluation report that's submitted, but it can be a full inspection with site inspection and program review. And then recommendations through the board designee, the committee, and the board itself.
Thank you. Questions?
I do. I have questions for board members. What this extension program? First of all, how many programs in California has this subject to this regulations?
We currently have one,
UCLA.
UCLA.
Okay. What does program offer to students academically? Is a degree or certificate or something?
It's an extension certificate.
What does certificate do in the context of acquiring their qualifications for take licensing exam?
Yes, we've built in credit for that with an extension certificate.
Oh, okay. And we specifically qualifies the number of credit or whatever is if you have this program for meeting the licensing requirement.
Yes, it's one of the
okay.
pathways to our
Okay.
licensure.
Okay.
And California is the only state that has the extension certificate program.
Yeah. Is this accreditation or by LAM lab at all in any context, or they are not considered as a part of their program?
It's my understanding that LAAB is not accredited to accredit an extension certificate. That actually they are accredited to accredit undergraduate degrees and master's or graduate degrees, but not extension certificates. So they cannot do this.
Have they raised any concerns that their ability to credit this program or their inability to accredit this program? Do they have any concerns from lab?
We haven't received any concerns. We did approach them twice asking for their, if they could accredit the certificate programs. We went on record just trying to seek their accreditation for the extension program, but we were denied. So,
Yeah, I'd like to add that I don't think that they were able to take an official stand on this other than just a straight denial. But I think the real concern were by individual members of lab that had expressed concern about accepting an extension program as qualifying for to sit for the exam. And I think just based on the conversations that I had at the time, it was they viewed it almost more as a threat to existing accredited programs.
So last question for this round is, so this regulatory requirement from the states would design specifically address UCLA's extension program. If UC Davis want to have a extension program, this regulations applies the same?
Yes, when we originally started this work, UC Berkeley had an extension program, and we were looking at both of them, and then UC Berkeley pulled their extension program, so right now we have one. So the idea is, yes, if any of the campuses here in California, and I would imagine a state college also, CSUS would also, it'd be built for that too.
Mark, when this was discussed at our meeting at UCLA, they came with some proposed changes, like not necessarily having a licensed person, and I made comments of, but then you're really gearing it to one program, and that this program or this change would allow, say, like here we have 2 extension programs that are currently not certified, but then it gives them the pathway to be certified. So I wanted to make sure that this is not specific just to UCLA, that it would now apply and make it fair to everybody across the state.
Future ones. Okay.
Other questions of Tara?
I guess having participated in the accreditation visit at UCLA at one time. I'm just curious why these new changes were looking at identifying it as a one-day visit. I agree. I think if we could drop the terminology one day and just set a site visit, I think that would suffice, because I think in all things considered, it may take well more than one day to get a true picture of what the program is really entails, especially if it's a brand new program that's wanting to start up.
Yeah, recalling the subcommittee work, and I'm hearkening back my memory banks here, we were trying to be respectful of time requirements for professionals who were going on the visit, and but I am totally in support with the concept of site visit and not addressing the time factor with that.
So just the information, I have been on NAB visit quite a few times, so fairly extensive. I think it is wise not to specify a time, a length.
Okay, I have several questions. The first is it's where we reference that this accreditation would last for 6 years. So I'm just curious if we know how long a 4-year program is accredited by LAAB.
I don't offhand know.
Okay. I'd like to, I'm just curious, because where I'm going with this is, I understand LAAB doesn't want to really have anything to do with this program, but I think ultimately it'll get revisited, and I'm hopeful that, it is something that they'll embrace, because I do think we need to expand, our different pathways to licensure. So with that in mind, I think that, determining who's going to be on this committee, I think it's important that we have an LAAB representative. I don't think they have to be a professor, but I do think that we should have some kind of representation, because that was the whole idea behind this, is that we were trying to align this program with LAAB curriculum. So I think it's important to have some type of representation from LAAB. And then I guess the third question I had was who determines, is it the chair of the LATC that determines who's on this committee? I mean, normally I just think we should outline how this committee is formed. I don't know. Tara, what do you think? Is that getting too specific?
I think since we're trying to accomplish several big picture items with this, which is providing the approval process and renewal process, specifying the time frame that the approval is good for, and trying to do a better job of describing to the reviewer what we're looking for and how we're trying to protect students of these programs. I think until we have a better idea whether or not it's working, I don't know that we need to specify it, because the board could provide the designee, the LATC could, the program manager, the executive officer, the chair of the LATC, the board president, anybody effectively could be involved to designate who the reviewer is. And maybe that's appropriate, because if it needs to change, somebody drops out, we want more than 1 or 2 people there. If we're talking about needing to do these reviews in somewhat of a timely fashion, I think it's better to leave it open so that we have more options. And it's not lost on me, one of the biggest problems that the committee has faced is trying to figure out what requirements are sufficient, what's protective, How does it align with LAAB? And then how do we enforce it? So I think that's why we were trying to get someone from LAAB involved. The LAAB itself will not be involved, which is unfortunate, because I think that even the certificate programs would prefer to be LAAB accredited, because it's, definitely a badge of honor. I do not know how we can get LAAB experience in review without creating a conflict of interest. I don't know, which is why I'm just recommending that you leave it broad as a designee and with an S, because it could be 1, it could be 5. We could have someone who is hired by the board or the LATC who has accreditation experience. We could leave it open if at some point we figure out that there's a problem, that we could do a better job of describing who the designee needs to be. We could change it at that time, but I think right now we're unsure, and we're in uncharted territory because we're one of the few, if not the only state that's trying to provide this pathway. And without LAAB's help here, we're doing our best. But we just need to not cross the line with respect to who is going to be the reviewer, especially when it may be direct competition. So I would recommend leaving it open if at some point you realize that the ability to designate multiple people or certain kinds of people is not enough. We could change it at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have questions about the same topic. Sorry. Sorry. I'm not clear or sure whether it should state about a LAAB, but would there be some language that talks about this potential conflict of interest? Or is that already in regulations and other places? Because earlier in your first presentation, you did express the concern that it could be someone who, has conflicts with everything else. And then if we do not specifically state who these are, the way it is now, would there be a minimum number where we still stay at 3 people that would review, be the review committee?
I think that's a good point, because, if we eliminate LAAB, the mention of it, doesn't mean that we're not subject to a conflict of interest because we haven't specified that certain individuals shall not be designees. So I think that's, up to you. What language do you want to see in here to limit the scope of it so that there's no potential conflict of interest? And do you want a specific number of reviewers?
Well, I think we want, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Tim. I'm sorry.
So 2 observations. One is if looks like a lab did not want to get involved or rejected this notion, if I put very frankly. So then as a state board, we have to be cautious. Are we in direct conflict of their desire or not? If we don't want to create a perception, maybe it's wise not even mention any sorts of reference in our regulation here. We can always implement this in our spirit. When the board appoints a designee, we can appoint a lab expert. Go there, see. See, that's our decision. But in public presence, we are not in direct conflicts with lab, if that's what we want to present the state. Right? For example, we don't want, now in new culture with Architects Board, we definitely don't want to present ourselves in conflict with NCOB, for example. We don't want to have that perception. So that's one consideration. 2 is, I think, Patricia, you mentioned, you used the word from a NAB, lab. You actually referred to the staff or the faculty from a school that is lab credit. That's what you mean, right? Not direct.
I think
A member from or a member appointed by lab. Very different.
yes, I understand. I wanted to keep it broad, but I did want to put something in there that there would be some type of LEAB representation. And the reason why I say that is, you know, you have a turnover on the committee over time, and you know the whole spirit of this certification process was to be something that's comparable to what LAAB is doing. So I think it's rather important that it is documented. But are you saying it legally it's you see it as a problem? Tara?
I do see it as a problem. I mean, unless we've got an LAAB reviewer, I don't see how a random faculty member from an LAAB accredited program who may or may not be subject to the rigors and direct review of LAAB, I don't see how that's connected enough in this situation to qualify them to be as a qualified reviewer of this extension program. So I don't think they have any additional expertise to bring to this if it's a random faculty member from an LAAB program. And also, I can see the conflict of interest.
So I just want to clarify, because Tian, I think you were asking the same thing. I'm not necessarily saying it's a faculty member that's LAAB whatever certified. I'm just saying someone that's familiar with LAAB that understands the accreditation process and understands the curriculum that they would require.
Susan?
I'll go back to the subject of number of reviewers. Your recommendation was a very generic language. I think there should be a minimum of 3, especially because if it's only 2 and they both disagree, or one agrees, one doesn't agree, then how do you vote? So by having the odd number, you could have 2 agree, 1 not. I also think 1 should be a licensed landscape architect, because that's where this is all heading, is the credits that this group would give to the board, and having someone licensed on there would help then the understanding of what it would take to the test that these people would take. So bottom line, 3 minimum, and of those, 1 a licensed landscape architect.
Is that on top of a committee member? Because all the committee members are licensed.
So we would keep in there 1 committee member.
If you want.
Okay, so I would support that then. If 1 would need to be on the committee, i.e. then they would be licensed.
Okay, so if we're going down the path of specifying who must be a board designee, we do need to make sure that that member who's appointed to this reviewing team is not personally affiliated in a conflict of interest way. We don't want somebody who's necessarily going to pad the results, because we need to make sure that the students are protected and thus the consumers are protected.
Then I would also add that some language in here that none of the committee people reviewing have any explicit or implied conflict. I don't know how that language would work, but it's the same thing like Andrew needed to recuse himself from this conversation specifically because there is a conflict of interest. So I don't know how that gets added in there.
Questions, comments over here?
Go. Don't we already have that somewhere that, isn't that documented somewhere already, that if there's some kind of conflict that we need to recuse ourselves?
Is that in your administrative manual?
I don't think so. I'm not aware of it, but
I know there are a lot of government code sections that speak to agency membership and appointments. So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of statutes that could apply. It just depends on what we're talking about. And if we're talking about an ethical duty or just an association or a financial conflict of interest, those have varying levels of responsibility to recuse or sit in and not vote, or you're okay as long as you disclose the potential conflict. It just depends. So I was thinking another way of doing this is we could have the regulation and then specify who a site reviewing committee could be comprised of in the administrative manual. That way it gives you all an easier way to adjust the composition of the reviewing team as needed, rather than having to go through a year and a half process of updating the regulation.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think it's going to be extremely difficult not to bring some bias to any review, simply because, I mean, as landscape architects in California, there's a limited number of schools. As practitioners, we pretty much know just about everybody. And there's always friendly rivalries between the different schools too. But I would say that having gone through the accreditation as the accreditation team the last time that UCLA went through here, I thought that the three members of the team were all extremely professional. We set aside any differences that we had or whatever and just focused on whether or not the program really provided the quality and the service to the people in the program as far as meeting the requirements to sit for licensure. That was our primary concern. And, you know, every program can be improved one way or another. So that's basically what I have to say. Mm-hmm.
Okay, additional comments? We have...
No, I have lights on.
We do have lunch here. We can continue on if you guys would like to.
I have a comment. Do you think the next item is going to take very long in the conversation regarding the collection? Because there is a group heading back to Sacramento, and it would be great if they could leave as close to 1 or at least before 1:32, because if you wait till 2 o'clock, you're sitting in traffic heading north.
Okay, well, let's finish up this discussion first, and then we can talk about that.
Oh, okay.
That's okay?
Sorry. I
No, that's
thought
okay.
you were saying lunch was here, so.
Well, lunch is here, but I also want to get a feel for you guys if you're ready to move this thing forward, or if you need a little more time to discuss it. Yeah, Karen?
I would just like to add that I think looking long-term strategically, I think as a professional, we need to push for lab to begin to recognize these alternative paths to licensure. And I don't know what's the most effective way of doing that. I know I sit on the ASLA National Policy Committee, and I know that ASLA is actually beginning discussions on recognizing extension programs and alternative paths to licensure. I think they're thinking through how they want to address this issue. But I don't think that we should be so timid about this that we don't put our weight into that conversation as well if we think it's going to be a benefit to the public as far as increasing the number of licensees that are delivering services to the public. So I just wanted to add that in.
Do you, John, have any recollection of the affiliations of the members you were on that site visit team with?
Yes. It was myself. I do not recollect the person's name, but he was a faculty member at San Luis Obispo in the LA program there. And then it was Catherine. It was another member of the LATSI board at that time. Yeah, I believe.
Was it Catherine Demos?
It may have been.
Tara, you had mentioned that we could describe the committee a little bit more in some administrative, where is that you were talking about?
Okay, so it looks like the last version was approved by LATC September 12, 2018. It is technically called the Landscape Architects Technical Committee Member Administrative Manual, and you should all have a copy of this. And any changes to this are made always at public meetings, so there is that public participation. It's not just an underground.
And if I may, Tara, your suggestion is within that manual, we would identify how we put together review committees, define it there, and then that's how we would operate.
Right. If that is your pleasure, we could do it that way and potentially describe it in the administrative manual that any 3-member committee, shall not have conflicts of interest with this, that, or the other. We could get a little bit more specific while keeping it broad. So perhaps it's not, we have to have an LAAB faculty member, but we make sure that of a 3-member team, there's no more than one person affiliated with that program, which necessarily means that if someone who got their extension certificate there, they could actually serve on this review, but there would be 2 other people who didn't go to that program who were affiliated with other programs. That way, potentially, we're getting a broader review of the program itself.
Thank you.
Okay, what's the pleasure of the group?
Do we, because there's these discussions and these changes, it doesn't appear that we could be making a vote on final approval? Or do we just want to make a motion about reviewing these comments and coming back for approval?
Well, my personal opinion is we had a subcommittee that prepared information. It was revised, updated, brought to us. We have some new stuff. From my perspective, of someone who's been along for the ride, I'm very comfortable with our discussion and some of the changes we're talking about. I think that we could craft a motion and move this thing along. I think that it's been lingering for some time and that we need to move it along. I don't want to rush us by all means, but I personally think this thing's ready to move forward.
Just a quick question. When is the extension program up for, again, for review? Do we know that?
I believe they've been given, and so the initial approval expired, but we've given subsequent extensions on that approval, but they are overdue for a review.
I agree. I think we've discussed this quite a bit, and it has been a topic of discussion for probably 2 years. So I kind of hesitate to drag this out any more. I do recall reading the meeting minutes how I said I hope we are going to be able to resolve this soon. So I'm comfortable with making a decision today. There is just one little minor thing on the first page. It's item number 7. It says the program's director shall be a landscape architect. I just think we should add licensed in there.
Isn't by default, because we have a Practice and Title Act by using landscape architect, that does mean they are licensed?
Yeah.
But I don't disagree with,
Yeah.
but by sheer definition of what a landscape architect is, so I'm comfortable adding the
Yeah.
word.
I understand where you're coming
Yeah.
from. Yeah, I mean, I think it just helps to clarify, but again, is there a
Tara?
legal problem?
Should that then be a California licensed
That's the
landscape architect?
I was thinking about that too, if you want to be that level of a specific level.
Okay, is someone ready to push a motion forward? I don't want to rush us.
Should I
But-
take a stab at it? Let's see if what the, let's see, how do I want to word this? I make a motion that the board approve the substantive changes per the revisions on this DCA legal comments pertaining to proposed amendments to CCR Section 2620.5 with the changes of removing the specific titles of the people on the review board, a minimum number of 3, adding the word California licensed to item F per the comment. Does that answer the question?
Or was that item 7? It
I'm
was-
sorry, 7.
Yeah,
You're right, 7.
first page.
First page, number 7, adding the program director shall be a California licensed landscape architect. And then I'm referring to these, this page of the revisions that she recommended. Is that okay?
Are you moving alternative C with changes to remove the titles, but to require a minimum number of 3 designees for a site visit? Okay.
Yeah, so we would get rid of the LAAB, the outside lands, the ones that were having the conversation. I think you have in here that one shall be actually the licensed, that's the program director, right?
Right now, it says the board designees may include 1 member of the LATC, 1 faculty member from a California school accredited by the LAAB, and that's it.
So my motion was to remove the reference to the LLAB per our conversation.
And do you want to designate that it is a 3-member committee?
Yes, minimum. Can we add minimum?
Right, we could change it to the board designees shall include a minimum of 3 designees. And here's where I get kind of lost. Who shall be comprised of no more than 1 designee affiliated with the educational program, and then leaving the other 2 silent. I think when we start to do that, we're kind of trying to give an idea that we want this group of 3 to be diverse.
I'll go with your recommendation. So the motion would include a minimum of 3 members, one of which is our committee. And then if you want to add that, a second one would have the associated with the program. Does that have to be seconded first and then a friendly amendment, or does it just modify my motion?
You're still making your amendment? so
Okay,
I
I'm
believe
still
that-
making my motion, okay.
Or you're making your motion, I'm sorry.
We're up here in the official diet now.
Yeah, thank you.
And also, what we had talked about, dropping the designation for how many days on the visit. Just be
I think, isn't that on your summary sheet here? Because
Right,
we
so,
had the initial markups, or the comments, and then this was all her proposed changes.
I don't know, I didn't prepare that, so I don't know if all of my changes are in there, but we are talking about going with alternative C, which does not contain the one-day terminology.
Okay, so that's part of my motion.
I second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. We have a second. Is there any more discussion or thoughts or comments from members? Patricia?
So it was my understanding we were going to also, this would be a different motion, but to have a better description of this committee in the administrative manual. So that would be like a separate motion, correct?
Is that necessary for a motion, or can that just be a directive?
Okay, so I think what we could do is, it's been clarified a little bit more than it was. So we know that it has to be at least 3. We know one is going to be an LATC member, and only one of them can be affiliated. And I need to find a better word for affiliated. We're talking about probably a recipient of an extension certificate or otherwise affiliated. We don't want somebody who currently works there. That way it sets it up that the third person could be from an LAAB accredited program, generally speaking. So with that understanding, I can craft the language, take it to the board, and whatever they approve, if you believe once they've approved it that that provision needs additional clarification, we could do so through the administrative manual. Hopefully we won't have to, because I think we're getting a better idea of who this team should be comprised of.
You okay? Okay. John, Tien?
No, I think everything has been covered.
Tien, anything? Okay, I'm going to open up to public now. Public comment on the motion? No public comment. I'm closing public comment. Since our vice chair isn't here, I was going to go ahead and call roll call myself. Are there any other comments by members before I do roll call? No. Mark Truscott, yes. Susan Landry.
Yes.
Patricia Trouth.
Yes.
John Rashensky.
Yes.
Motion carries. Okay. So let's bring Andy in. And so do we want to take a short break? I think we need a break. Do we want to take lunch? Break for lunch. Okay. We're going to go ahead and we're going to break for a quick lunch, which means we're not going to conduct any business. We're going to adjourn. Half hour?
Recess.
Recess. We are going to recess. Thank you. For 1/2 hour. 1 o'clock is when we will resume. We're going to resume the Landscape Architects Technical Committee meeting, and we are on to item L, review and ratification of contract with Cedars Business Services, LLC for debt collection services to collect outstanding administrative fines and cost recoveries. Trish.
Okay, this is more of thank you, an update. As part of the 2017-2018 strategic plan, it contained the objective to contract with collection agencies to pursue and recover unpaid citations from unlicensed individuals. So staff work collectively with the Department Business Services Office to develop a scope of work to be performed by debt collection agency that fits our needs, as well as a breakdown of the estimated administrative fines, cost recoveries, and potential litigation services were provided for bidding purposes. A request for quote with an invitation to bid was sent to 7 California small business debt collection vendors on the Department of General Services approved vendor list. 3 vendors responded with quotes, with the lowest bidder, Cedars Business Services, was selected according to small business preference guidelines. The collection agency contract is a combined contract in which the agency will be providing debt collection services for both LATC and the board. The contract was approved and is effective April 9th, 2019 through April 8th, 2022. At today's meeting, the committee is asked to review and ratify the contract with Cedars for debt collection services for a 3-year term beginning April 9th, 2019.
Okay, questions from the members? Mike?
I move to ratify the contract with Cedars Sinai, or is it Cedars Business Services LLC for debt collection services to collect outstanding administrative fines and cost recoveries.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Board comments, questions? I'm going to open up to public. Public concerns, questions? None. I'm going to close public comment. Roll call, please.
Mark Trescott,
Yes.
Andrew Bowden, aye. Susan Landry,
Aye.
Patricia Trouth,
Aye.
John Roshinsky.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Motion carries. Item M, review of future LATC meeting dates. Trish?
Okay, the next LATC meeting is scheduled on August 13th in Chula Vista. And then the one following that, we discussed earlier today, will be November 8th in Sacramento. What we should identify, if possible, the board will be having their next meeting on June 12th in San Luis Obispo at Cal Poly. If there is a representative from the committee that is available to attend, we'd like to ask at this time.
Do we have anybody who is available to attend?
I think I have something that day.
I can check my schedule. Can I let you know?
Mm-hmm.
I can't do it.
John? Tricia?
I'd have to check my schedule. I think there's a chance. Let's see, do we know what day of the week that is?
I think it's a Wednesday.
A Wednesday? Wednesday, okay. I can check my schedule.
Okay, so we have a couple candidates here. Great, so let Trish know, and we'll figure it out. And then I can be backup. If you two gentlemen can't, I can, I'm sorry? Yeah, Thursday. Wait, I have Wednesday, the June 12th. No? Let's clarify this. Wednesday, June 12th. Okay,
Not our meeting, the board meeting.
That's his meeting.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's right.
great. In Chula Vista, do we have a tentative location, or we're still trying to figure that?
School,
Southwest?
Southwestern, and the student chapter ASLA will be hosting that meeting for us.
Well, that's excellent. Okay, any other comments, questions, concerns from the members? Okay, I don't need a motion to adjourn, so I'm going to adjourn this meeting.
If anybody has material